Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest David Tomasi. He's a father Catholic and a neuroscientist, as well as a therapist out in Vermont, and he is presently running for a position in his local school board. In this conversation, we talk about his concerns with public education in Vermont, finances, science, truth, and ideology, and we go back and forth between wrestling with these ideas and then discussing his particular points of view with regards to solutions. You can find David's links in the description below. I always enjoy talking with him. If you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating, also via the links below. Without further ado, here is David Tomasi.
Thank you for giving me this chance. It's been a while, to talk about stuff. I appreciate.
Well, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm running for the school board here in the local town, and perhaps I can navigate with you one of the reasons why I'm doing that, or at least the problems that I see in public education in the U.S., at least, in elementary and middle school. Yeah. Perhaps that would be a good conversation to have. I don't want this to be a campaign ad or anything like that. It's more like a reflection, you can bounce some ideas with me, if that's okay. Would that be something that we could do?
Well, you know me. I just want to.
All right, cool. Yes, well, thank you. Well, I like to knock gently on the door, and once you open, ask for permission.
All right, Mr. Vampire. What the heck is wrong with American education?
Oh, well, so let's start with that, because before I blame someone else, I should clean up my room, to quote Mr. Peterson. And some of the things that I noticed here were not unfamiliar in Europe either. And one of the things that there are two main areas that I'm concerned about. One is, what is very much labeled as, indoctrination versus education. And, we can label that, a variety of ways, but that's a concern a lot of families around here have, the content of their education. And the other one is what we're going to do about balancing the finances, because it's become extremely expensive in Vermont. So those are the two main areas of concern. And the first thing that I like to say is that nobody has a magic answer, but a centrist approach might actually be a good one. As in, what I can say is, in Europe, for instance, the system is different. So we pay teachers and staff significantly lower rates in comparison to the US. But in exchange for that, we have a different system where, if you want to use the term free, you can apply that to free education, free healthcare, and then benefits as far as retirement. So you need less money to perform the same task. But if you charge extra bucks to the families here, then your education should be, on a higher level. So in other words, I don't feel it's fair to families to pay so much and get so little. It's also not fair that to get a basic education, you need to send your kids to private schools. Public schools should do that. I mean, it should be an option if you want to, send your kids to private school, but the option should be predicated upon what the private school could offer beyond basic education. For instance, if you want to send your kids to, a religious school or Waldorf school, you should be interested in what they have to offer on top of basic math skills, basic English, arts, et cetera, et cetera. But those basics should be there for everyone, which is, I would assume, one of the key elements of separation between church and state, right? If it's public education, everybody should be welcome, but you should have the main basics here. So that's one of the things I'm concerned about. And the other thing is kind of the political divide, where families are, like the rest of the country, split in the middle. And Vermont traditionally has always been more on a left-wing perspective, at least for the last, I would say, 20 years or so. And that is definitely reflected in my town, Colchester. But things are becoming more and more half and half, which from one perspective would make the approach to education more balanced, more democratic. We can talk. And Vermont is usually a good place to do that. Vermont usually it's a place where people can talk, face to face, eye to eye, rather than through party lens. But then the downside of that political divide is that you don't have a spectrum. So if, I don't know, my party agrees on ABC, then you belonging to a different party will have to fight A, B, and C and propose, whatever else just to oppose. And I'm not a member of any party. I'm not a politician. So the main reason why I'm running for office is simply to talk about these problems. But if I were to give you a summary, I feel that, I don't know, as far as education, the two parties only care about two words. The left cares about gender and race, and the right cares about bank account. I propose skills and knowledge instead of these two.
What do you mean the right only cares about bank account, how much it costs, or that students
No,
learn basic financial literacy?
No, I would say that is the stereotype that people perceive the party as in, like in Europe in the past, you had access to education. By past, I mean, Middle Ages, if you're royalty. So, it was not a democratic process. You already came from wealth and prestige and title, and only therefore you could, access education. But if you were a peasant, for many years, at least during the Middle Ages, you could not do that. Now, in the US, we no longer have monarchy, but we have oligarchy in response to that. So the big finances kind of decides for us what the parameters are. And I don't think that's really good either. But the alternative to that is really, I'm not going to judge you based on your merits, on your skills and knowledge, but I'm going to judge you on the premise of your gender and race. And those are the parameters that very often take the premise in public education. Now, in terms of the use of the money or the use of policies to protect gender and race, that's an entirely different conversation. But I feel that it's a conversation that takes over basic skills, as if teaching mathematics, English, and philosophy is intrinsically bad morally, is intrinsically, remnants of whatever colonialism or white supremacy or Eurocentric views. That's what I noticed.
So if you want your children to learn skills, first and foremost, who is there out there to teach them that? Where are these teachers coming from? And what does the school board have to leverage to get the kind of teachers that they want? Not just the kind of curriculum, but the teachers.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, because I'm less frustrated with the teachers as opposed to with the system, at least in Vermont. I feel that sometimes teachers, if not most of the time, they're fighting against this really invisible wall to be able to teach. For instance, they don't have any homework whatsoever, none, zero. They don't have to perform really any skills. And I feel that the system just goes with that. And the excuse that I've heard was that they don't want to add more work to both parties, the teaching party, the teachers, the staff, or the families. Now, I'll be more empathetic to the latter because I'm a father myself. So I understand that someone who is already paying an enormous amount of money has to work hard to provide for their kids, might not have the time once the kids go back home to sit down with them and do homework. But at the same time, they don't really work enough in school. They don't really have the intellectual stimulation to grow. And so that's another thing. Why? That I would. Well, one of the reasons is because it's not valued. It's really not valued the way it used to be. It's and like, for instance, it doesn't have to cost a lot, but I think I have a pretty good evidence to say that, let's say my grandmother with no formal education whatsoever, grew up in a farm, she will still have much better math skills and English skills than a lot of recent graduates, precisely because the ratio of direct education as opposed to other policies that might fall under the umbrella of, say, social work, really are skewed toward social aspect and non-intellectual aspect. Now, I'm a neuropsychologist, of course I value that, but just to give you a number, direct education, what was increased in terms of spending between 10 and 12%, and anything else under the lens of social work and support education skyrocketed to 68%. And in the past, teachers also had this, if I can use the term, moral guide, this internal moral guide, whereby they could provide those nurturing elements to the kids, so the kids felt loved and appreciated and encouraged to study, but they also taught them. Versus now there's this kind of split where the assumption is that, well, you just graduate with, a master in education, you will do, in my view, the bare minimum to teach your kids basic knowledge, which again, it's much lower as a standard than only 10 years ago. And then we're going to have your kids spend much more time working on their emotions, which is fantastic. But this creates a split where, again, the emotions or the way emotions are portrayed to be takes precedence over basic academic skills.
Okay, so if the focus of public education is switched from academics to social life, it would be reasonable to assume that the academic standards, the testing scores would drop. But so let's say that kids are reading less and are unable to read more or unable to do math as well as they used to, because the school is not focusing on that. It's focusing on social and psychological needs.
Yes.
But if you look at the data, what's happening to the kids? They're the most depressed, dysfunctional, drugged up, anxious generation ever. So
that's spot on.
So it's not even work. Even if they were doing more work on the social stuff, it's obviously not working.
No.
So WTF, David.
Yes.
WTF.
Yeah. That would be the higher medical term that we use to define this situation. I agree with you. No, you're right. I mean, and that's a problem because, of course, when you make this type of claim, and I've been doing this for years, with the board as a private citizen, the response is, well, we are where we're supposed to be with, with our level of education. And in fact, we're scoring better than, almost every other school in the state. And on average, nationwide, we're really in good shape. But first of all, the bar is so low that it doesn't really take much to do better than average. It's extremely low to the point that, if anyone attempts to make a correction to any basic grammar statements, and granted, English is not my first language, but I take pride in learning it. But if you make any of this assumption that you perceive as being less inclusive, but on top of that, emotionally, as you properly pointed out, things are much, much worse than, never mind 5 years ago, but even like 10 years ago. They're really, really bad. And those two things are related, by the way, from a neurological standpoint. Those things are related in a causal matter. So not only it's a bad idea to substitute pseudo emotional nurturing in exchange for academics, but neurologically speaking, you do feel better about yourself and therefore experience lower rate of depression and anxiety if you feel some level of accomplishment. If you don't perform any skills, then you will not feel good about completing those skills. You're removing basic neurological factor. You're removing the basic sense of agency. Neurologically speaking, first and foremost, because it's good to talk about that, but also from a philosophical standpoint, a child likes to have role models that the child can look up to and become like.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. It's
aspiration.
Yes, exactly.
But what about? I'm trying to see the Steelman argument for backing away from accomplishment as what the children are being pushed to master. They're not being pushed to master accomplishment, and you're saying that that's going to have a negative aspect or a negative consequence on the children because the children get pleasure and enjoyment and confidence and all these other add-on, tacked-on effects beyond the skill just for the fact of mastering a skill. But what about comparative accomplishment? What if you put in place a meritocratic skills-based curriculum, and what you're going to have is a distribution of people's ability, even if they all strive the same amount, more or less, they're going to achieve differently. Won't that make them depressed to see that they're not as good as other people in academics? And then that will elicit a lot of distress culturally when it comes down to some kind of indisputable facts around IQ that certain groups will perform better than other groups, regardless of effort.
Well, I will push back about only the latter thing, the very last thing you mentioned, and I'll go back to the first premise. The last thing you mentioned, I push back because those groups are separated in terms of accomplishment, not because of the group itself, but because the skill-based process. As in, this is not what you said, but you can understand that could be a slippery slope to separate people in groups of the smart ones and the less smart ones. That is on a spectrum, in a sense that people do change as they can become smarter and smarter as they grow. Now, yes, in terms of the level of intelligence, there's a humongous amount of literature, on the G factor, IQ, that, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, it is true that certain groups overall appear to perform better than others. But the reason why they do that is really training. It's cultural. It's not genetic. And which is it should be a straightforward element to understand, because, we already experienced what it would mean to separate people on the basis of genetics and race. We saw what Germany did in the 1930s. We know there's no scientific basis for that whatsoever, to separate people in terms of their race. But paradoxically, that's very often what has been done under the umbrella term of inclusion toward gender and race. You separate people on the premise of characters which cannot be changed. You're born with it. But it is true that people might be born different in terms of what they start from. So, for instance, if you are, if you're a 5'7", you might not be able to perform as well in basketball as someone who was, 6'2" or something like that. But it does not mean that, academically speaking, you can reach a much higher level from which you started with. And so if you separate groups based on their skills, then promoting those skills will allow the person to feel better about themselves. Now, going back to what you said at the beginning, wouldn't that make things more complicated? Would that child feel bad? If everybody gets an A and the child gets, a C plus or something? Yes. And I will answer this in two ways. The first one is that is precisely because of this internal stimulation, the child might be pushed to feel better. As in, neurologically speaking, if there's something that creates discomfort, that pushes us to remove the discomfort from our lives. And so there is some element of fruition and usage. Like, you should feel bad if you don't perform well. The problem is not so much the fact you feel bad, is the societal attempt to remove any type of discomfort because it's perceived as, as exclusive of some sort. And so you try to remove any type of discomfort, but you cannot pick and choose, neurologically speaking. If you remove pain, you will remove pleasure. Those two things are deeply connected. That's one neurological aspect. The other aspect is that, through pain, there's also knowledge. There is an element that I dare to say is almost sacred in going through a pain that is inflicted not by randomness, but a pain as in discomfort of understanding that you could have done a better job. And next time you will be able to do a better job. This is a problem in terms of what the school does from a moral standpoint. And as much as I do value schools, the primary school should happen in the family. So if the child's parents keep enforcing this notion to the child, you're loved, you're worthy, and the reason why you're loved and worthy is because it's you, regardless of accomplishment, money, or title. So you already provide that notion of, in religious terms, you would say you're made in the image and likeness of God, regardless if you have a PhD or not. You're loved. So that if you have that extra love that fills your bucket, then you can withstand some disappointment in school because you know that once you go home, you will receive that love. And so you'll be more motivated to say, that doesn't feel good to be less, accomplished as the rest of the class. But my parents love me so much that they understand that this is something that can change in the future. I'm not born dumb and will stay that way for the rest of my life. I understand that things can change. So yes, discomfort and some emotional pain is not just neurologically useful, but it's morally justified.
Well, if it hinges on a child having enough love to then go forth and redouble their efforts when they face disappointment and try to strive and overcome whichever place on a skill that they're getting stopped at or frozen at, that's beyond the purview of a school to interfere in the family's love dynamic. And if you go from an inclusive culture to an excellence culture, right, a culture of inclusion, that can kind of take up some of the slack. The inclusion can take up, not authentically, but synthetically, the lack of love in the family. Culture of excellence doesn't have time for that. Culture of excellence is, you're here, we're teaching you. We can give you extra study guides, but you have to put in the effort. And we're just here to give you the tools you need to pass these tests, just so we can mark that a skill is being acquired. So one of the big questions it seems like you're pointing to is, you said the system. You're not angry or upset with the teachers or any given aspect of what's going on, but the system itself. Isn't that a cultural problem? And wouldn't a culture of excellence need to take on some sort of colonizing, intentional directive, just like the inclusive orthodoxy, the inclusive culture has taken to completely take over all of schooling from Vermont to California to Montana? It's all the same. It's all the same philosophy: inclusive excellence, inclusion, diversity, equity. That's what's coming down from the colleges of education into the education systems. To change that, which is a huge undertaking, that might solve some problems, but that's going to leave a lot of people behind. Either that, or we just have to really reimagine from the ground up what schooling is supposed to be there for. Is it an all-day daycare? Is it to train workers, or is it to actually teach skills? In which case, do we need it all day? Isn't 2 or 3 hours of study time and the rest free play? Wouldn't that, like in a homeschool model, and isn't that why people are fleeing from or opting out of public school to homeschool? I didn't actually form a direct question, so maybe you can riff on my scattershot.
I'll use my psychological skills to.
Yeah. That's why I have you on.
I would say yes to all, with a however. Yes, it is a cultural problem, and I would say that from a democratic standpoint, it might be an illusion, but still an illusion worth pursuing. What do I mean by that? Democracy might not be the best system, but it's the one that, at the very least, might make us feel that we have more agency. So, in other words, sitting down and talking rather than having someone that takes over and gives a direct dictatorial instruction might feel better, for the simple reason that the dictatorial approach might be good, in which case everybody will be okay, but unknowingly so, but subconsciously so. And there would be an approach that a father could do to his child, right? Trust me on this, or don't trust me, but I know what's best for you because you are 5. When you're 25, then you might have more life experience, and then you could go and walk your own path. But I could possibly make some mistakes, but those mistakes are predicated on my expertise at 5. So that is the parenting dictatorial element. However, I would say this, because it should be a democratic process, then you could have an option to either send your kids to private school or to homeschool. And I'm going to make the comparison with Europe as well. Now, I had the privilege not just to teach at university level, but back in the days, I was also elementary school and middle school teacher, both in public school as well as in Waldorf schools. So I got to see a bit of everything. And yes, first of all, in terms of the quality, yes, I would concur that if the artificial divide between facts only teaching and facts plus creativity in play, that the latter is more effective, as in, neurologically speaking, if you tell a child you must do this or else, as opposed to this task is a game, of course the child's brain and the child's soul, I dare to say, will perform better because the child will feel that it's a game. So it's mostly about the way we present those things. Now, to answer your second question, I guess, so what is school for? Is to teach us skills as a babysitting features or something like that, or to send us to the workforce? I think it should be a hybrid of everything, but there's a lot of mistakes that I would say historically have been done in the United States. One of such mistakes is the fake divide between creativity, liberal arts, and STEM fields. First of all, is historically false. Mathematics is a liberal art by definition. It's been like that since the invention of the modern school system. We're talking about 1086, I think, the first Western University of Bologna. And it was always like that, even during Roman time, Persian time, and Greek time. And neurologically speaking, we do also observe that this idea that you can be an liberal arts school creative person on one side and an MIT engineering graduate, it's neurologically not consistent. It's not true that you must pick between mathematics and arts. In fact, there's plenty of neurological evidence that disciplines such as music actually will improve your math skills. And that's also a false dichotomy, because in Vermont, a lot of those programs have been cut through as well. There's really less music education and less art education. So this idea that will make us students choose between facts or creativity, it's a lie. It's just not true.
Yeah, but it's not even, they're not even offering it. So it's not even, that dichotomy is not even being offered.
And that's, yes. So if one were to say, well, school is only there for you to get a job, I will also push against that. In fact, one of the most valuable part of my education in middle school, when I was a child, was the fact that, first of all, there was just sheer geocultural luck that was brought into a role. So from middle school, we are schooled in 4 languages. But you don't feel that you must do that. It's just a question of being born there. So you're just very creative to begin with. So for instance, in Vermont, I would totally fine. I would actually suggest that we should include at least French, for instance. I mean, whether we want to call Quebec Latin America or not, French is a Latin language. And, it's like half an hour away from us. So I would be totally fine with that. Or even Spanish, something just to stimulate the brain. But on top of that, I do feel that once you learn the passion for studying, which is something that you should get from fields such as philosophy, not necessarily engineering, then you can apply that to any type of branch of knowledge you choose. Mm-hmm. So teachers should teach the passion toward teaching. And see, so passion is an emotion, but those are the emotions that are really useful, kind, and truly inclusive. If you tell a child, and you do that by virtue of becoming a role model, this is fun, I love do this, then even if their grades might not be on par with the top 1% of the class, they still enjoy the process. They feel less bad about being not the top because they enjoy learning. That would be the same thing as if you were a musician. Correction, you are a musician. But from a musician standpoint, if all your pleasure is how many albums, do those things still exist in 2025? How many albums you sell? And that really removes the pleasure of making music. I'm not saying that you will be miserable. I'm not going to make that claim. But if the only motivation for performing music is seeing the numbers, we know neurologically that doesn't really lead to a life of fulfillment or happiness. We have plenty of examples, in Hollywood, in the music industry in the U.S., where many singers, musicians that reach the top ended up in very bad places, suicide included. So we know that money and numbers don't really provide a sense of purpose and meaning in life. So we shouldn't make the same mistake with our kids. We knew this for thousands and thousands of years. So school should be about all these aspects, teaching skills that are applicable because they're also fun. Like we teach mathematics so we can solve problems. If life becomes these adventures where you can see all these problems need to be solved, it's like having to go to school feels like having Lego blocks and putting things together, see how you can assemble them. Mm-hmm. So yes, one person might build a bigger tower than yours with Legos, but you still have fun in doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you bring up another cultural question around meaning and purpose. If school can't provide that, or if you don't want school providing it, the community has to provide that, and the community has to have some sort of shared set of values in order to provide that. How does one go about reinvigorating the question, what is man? What is meaning? What is the purpose of life?
So I'll do this. I'll do something that I despise, which is copying and pasting with artificial intelligence. But I'm gonna give a twist to that. So I'll copy and paste the answer to your question provided by the vast majority of philosophical and religious traditions since time immemorial. And the answer is, what's the meaning of it all? The meaning is to know and love God. That's the whole meaning of it all. Now you could say, well, but what about separation of church and state? What about, schooling for people that don't have any sets of, standardized beliefs? What about atheists and agnostics? Well, just remove the term God, and to know and love, it's still a pretty good way to go through life. To know and love. Now, one of the risks in removing any type of divine guidance, it's not that a God will go away, is that you're going to make something else God. That's one of the risks in doing that. So it might appear very inclusive and very democratic. After all, public schools should be a school for everyone, atheists, agnostic, religious people alike. Math is the same for everyone. But this idea you can remove the divine elements and just expect that there's nothing there, good luck with that. Something else will replace that. In the best case scenario, I would say science will replace that. So you say, well, to know and love nature and how nature works. Fantastic. That's a great idea for schools. Let's teach math so we can build houses, and let's understand biology so we can play, at the science fair with, with plants, for instance. Right? Yeah. Or let's study English so that we can create poems. Let's study art so that we can create a painting. So you explore, but it's still about to know and love. The knowing part, I feel it's the biggest issue at this point, because very often the knowing part is more objectively observed and validated. As in, it's easier from both a theoretical and empirical standpoint to demonstrate what you know versus what you don't know. That's a scientific method 101, really. Let's have an hypothesis, let's test it. I might be either correct or incorrect. And if I don't have a clearer answer, that means that I should try again, which again, it's the little scientist game. And that's how children appreciate. Let me take this little car apart, this little doll apart, try to put it back together. Right? That doesn't really work. Okay, let me try again. That's fun. So knowledge is easier. We love it's a little more complicated because very often love is used as this bumper sticker for many things that are not either useful in the best case scenario or very damaging in the worst case scenario. Very often when people say love is love, what they really mean is sex is love. And that's another problematic aspect of the type of education that our children receive in school, which is a paradox, because on one side, you have almost fear of teaching them anything related to biological sex. But in exchange for that, you will spend a lot of extra time and money to teach them about whatever identity makes the news at that moment. In both cases, I would say it's this new pseudo-puritanistic aspect, which science should remove. Like, it's not a question of belief. It's not a question of, in 2025, we believe this set of things. We should say, this is what we know based on science, and that is fun. Then if you want to add the elements of religion, feel free to do that, but that's not necessarily what the school is for. Am I answering this question?
Well, you're bringing up a lot of difficulties. I can see how you would be very valuable as a input and guide on a school board. I don't know how the power structure is arranged. Like, what do they do? They make recommendations. Do they actually tell the school what to do and what not to do, or do they just give recommendations, and then the school's going to do whatever they want with more or less
Well,
meaning?
the answer will be yes. They should make recommendation, and I think we exchanged some info via email. What the school board should not be is what the school board in New York. It was like Monroe County, I think, last week, and there was a big video through the internet where many parents actually attended this school board meeting in Monroe County auditorium, and they were very concerned about the way sex and gender and other aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion were taught to their kids. And it's a public event. Every citizen is allowed to attend, and even more so if you're a parent, and even more so if you're a parent with children in that specific school district. But the response of the school board was, "This is our meeting." And that's, first of all, that's really anti-democratic, but it's also not from a moral standpoint, from an inclusion standpoint. You should trust the parents to be at the very least somewhat expert in their kids.
Yeah.
And so they should listen to what parents do. But the paradox is the fact that they might trust the kids over the parents. So one could say, well, like in my field, right? If a person were to come to me and ask questions about the brain, yeah, of course, part of me would say, well, I most likely have more expertise than you in this very specific field. So I might have to ask you for some level of trust in my expertise, education, and license, right? And so, yes, the school board should also have an expertise that might actually surpass the one of the average parents. Fair enough, okay? But that claim, we are the expert, completely falls apart when the school board starts to invite, and this is happening, not just in New York, but here in Vermont as well, starts inviting students to ask them about what the proper way to do this or that might be. One of the examples would be raising the Black Lives Matters flag in our district. Now, it's great to include children because that's an element that you can find in many private systems as well, like Montessori school, Waldorf school. Some elements of Catholic education is like that. Some element of Islamic education is like that. You include the children in the process. What you don't do is asking the students to make moral, ethical, or even worse, scientific decision for you. That's not just very dangerous because the child does not know what an adult should know. But the second problem is that you're putting an enormous amount of pressure to the child to make these decisions. Imagine this situation. A child, actually, my child will come to me and say, "Hey, Dad, I think I should have the whole cake, this big cake." And my response will be, well, if that's what you feel, you should do that. Although I know that if you ate a whole cake, you'll have stomachache, you start to vomit and have, stomach problems. So I'll exercise kindness in listening to my child. But what my child is actually asking me is to provide an informed opinion. So the school board should be there to inform, thus educate the children, but should most definitely listen to the parents, because after all, the parents are the family of those children.
Yeah. But if it's a healthy school board, they open up input from the parents and even, do a survey of the kids, like what the kids want for certain levels of things, just to take the temperature and see if things are working or not working. They're still not the teachers and the principal and the superintendent, right? So what do they do on the other side? What role does the school board have at directing the school itself?
Well, yes and no, actually, especially in the case of the superintendent, they do work together and the meeting are together. So they don't have separate meeting. You do have the school board, of course, and then you have, we don't have a particular situation now in Vermont where the agency of education is perhaps going to take over the Board of Education. And it's something that has to do with new policies from our governor, Phil Scott. And in practice, we don't know how this will look like, but the idea is to reduce the sheer amount of number of districts in the state. Now, it's a very small state, but the problem is that our town of Colchester is one of the biggest ones. So if every other district in more rural areas will have between 10,000, 15,000 students combined, we will have like 34 plus thousand students. And so there might be a problem of how can you have a centralized education system that cater to the needs of multiple children? Well, I'm not in a position to the centralized element. In fact, from a scientific standpoint, that is a great idea. Like, for instance, I'm going to use myself as an example. My license should be valid and predicated upon the exact same education and verification, like when you do the board examination, so that it's not a good idea that each state will create a different pathways to, let's say, neuroscience, psychology, or medicine. You should be able to go to a doctor in Alaska and get exactly the same care in New York or in Tennessee. And I would say for education will be exactly the same thing. The downside of the centralized approach is that, yeah, but what about the differences in children? And here's what I would say. Well, people are people and human beings are human beings regardless where you are. So those differences are not as relevant. As in, mathematics should not change. English should also not change. But the application might change, but it's not something that should be too much of a problem. So as you said, in a healthy board of education, a healthy local school board, the main process the school board should be focused on is providing good education to the children. That's really the main reason to have the school board.
So the school board does have input into the curriculum.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, both directly and indirectly. For instance, if the curriculum was only fact-based, then one could make the case that the local school board is less, I dare to say, important, because it was more like an institution to administer certain facts. Or, for instance, how much money will be spent on renovating, I don't know, the roof of the building where the school is. But the problem is that there's also indirect education. So, for instance, those things I mentioned earlier about certain policies that have to do with diversity, inclusion, or sex and gender, they are part of what is presented to the children, and therefore is also a form of education. So by virtue of asking those questions and providing answers they're not indicative of listening to the parents, they take charge and tell the parents what the children should be exposed to and ultimately what they need to study.
Okay, so if you get into a position of authority and influence, how would you go about changing, or what pressure points would you go about pressurizing to move the school in the direction that you see as the good?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, I will have to follow all the responsibilities that are already set in place, and in that sense, I appreciate the framework. So if you ask me, okay, what are you doing? Well, you have to set goals, and that has to do with the curriculum and create policies, right? And then the other part is the finance part, how to allocate resources to make sure that the teachers are paid and the school is there. And then the oversight element is the representation of the community. So I would say that my professional background, which is in psychology, medicine, neuroscience, and education, would or should inform the way I work on the curriculum. I might be biased, but I think a scientific bias is a good bias when it comes to teaching children, because I know a few things about the brain and I know a few things about how the brain learns things. So I could use that as a scientific leverage. And then I would say, since a lot of the school board, like it or not, is socially constructed, is policy and politics constructed, we live in a community. I also had the, I'll use the term privilege. I had the privilege to come from a completely different system. I'm an immigrant, married to a refugee, and all our family members are refugees. And so when I talk about things such as diversity, inclusion, or sex and genders, at the very least, I can say that a lot of those policies that were implemented to promote love and inclusion on paper end up actually being more damaging to the immigrant community, at least in Vermont. So it's I think that the scientific part is useful to say, you don't have to trust me on that. These are the research paper clearly indicates what's good and what's preferable, math, English, social policies, as opposed to what is not shown to be working. And from a family and personal perspective, which of course is related to the work I do, neuropsychology also has to do with emotions and love and care and family. That will give me the chance to say, well, I might have a lens from the outside, so don't have to be, for lack of a better term, prisoner of this bipartisan attitude toward education, where one party wants A, B, C again, and the other party was D, E, F. I might say, well, actually, I feel that B and C are good, but E and F are also good, so let's combine those things. And the reason I combine that is predicated upon science and expertise, not politics.
Do you have a favorable opinion on the school system in which your children attend?
I have a great opinion of the people, not a good opinion of the system. And let me explain what I mean by that. I have to explain because something that I really don't like is when I hear people saying, well, this is proof of systemic intolerance or systemic racism. And very often those terms are used as an umbrella term where you don't really possess any real facts, but you just want to approach the problem as a problem of victim and perpetrator. And it's going to be this amorphous entity, whereas the system is bad. Okay, but the system is made by people. But so let me explain what I mean by that. The system in place is unfortunately part of the situation that we observe at the national level, not just at the state level. And this system according to which we think we have to substitute facts for certain types of misplaced emotions, because the idea is that will make us a kinder and more inclusive society. So that's kind of the system umbrella. And that's part that I really don't think we should embrace, not on the basis of emotion, but based on facts. We know as a fact that those policies, that type of curricula, are not just not good academically, morally, and emotionally, but they're dangerous. They really make our children not just less skilled, but more prone to develop higher rates of anxiety, higher rate of depression, and suicidality. So that has to go on the premise of science. I am fond of the teachers, the vast majority of them that worked with my children, but I must say that what I observe is there's a huge gap between private conversation you have, say in parents-teacher conferences when it's about these topics, as opposed to official emails. I would dare to say that a lot of teachers are afraid to speak up against something that's been implemented at this point for the last 10 years when it comes to those policies, despite the fact that they know instinctually that those are not good things. And because they're not less intelligent, in many cases they're very well educated, they know that the science does not support those policies, but they're afraid to speak up because they in the end represent the system.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say that you would provide cover for those opinions, those critical opinions of the shorthand DEI?
Also because I would say I have less to lose. As in, I would say that nobody has much to lose. I mean, you shouldn't compromise the truth in any case, I would say. But let me put it this way: something that I don't know, I discovered over the years, and it's not that I invented anything, but something that I try to abide by is I much rather be embarrassed than being wrong. When I do either public speaking or present an opinion, and by then I mean I might say something that is factually wrong, and someone will have to fact check that, and I might embarrass myself in a conversation like this. But that overall, it's a minor inconvenience, feeling publicly embarrassed from speaking up, as opposed to be so wrong and be wrong over the years, whereby it will cause damage. So it's a risk I'm willing to take, and that's one of the reasons why I'm planning to have this conversation. And the other thing is kind of funny that my opponent, Nick Longo, who's he's served on the board for many years, he's actually a really nice guy. We agreed on a lot of things, and I think that's also indicative not just of how Vermont works overall, where people can talk, but it's also a nice thing to say. Let me debate you and agree on 98% of the things you say. It's a nice feelings. Where, again, as a psychologist, I do think that a lot of these policies have been motivated by fear. The knowledge is there, but people are double guessing their moral compass. They may say, well, I think this doesn't feel right. And yet I've been told that this is right, and I shouldn't base this on just my personal experience. So I'd rather not say anything about it. I don't think that the problem is being either coward or disingenuous or fake. I think it's fear, which is something that we all experience from time to time. I just have maybe the luck of having a family that supports me, a family that comes from a different angle, also a family that comes from different countries, and so I'm less concerned about being attacked, because first of all, I have the science to back my claims up. But if any of those claims in new scientific data might be challenged, well, I'll be happy to have a conversation when the time comes. So,
yeah, we are in the early weeks of a potentially major seismic shift in the way that the federal government behaves. Yes. The current president, Donald Trump, has said that he's going to disband or absorb or I don't know, eradicate even, maybe, the Department of Education. You could probably make an educated guess that a lot of this DEI stuff comes directly from the Department of Education via the so-called colleges of education.
Yeah.
All these education degrees, if you actually look into it, they are not necessarily... They're probably one of the lowest skills that one can go get a doctorate or master's in, from what I hear. Speaking with people who've gone through that system and then seeing, the fallout of the ideas going through. So if the federal government stops forcing this stuff through, and you still have the colleges of education forcing teachers to learn all this stuff and then replicate it in the classroom, then you have all the accreditation, the accreditation level. There's potential for a major mix-up, release of that system into a potentially different system. And with the disbanding of the DEI, and even Trump saying that he will not send any money to schools that support this stuff. Some of that fear is going to go away, but there's going to be a vacuum. Potentially there's going to be a vacuum, that moral education being swapped out for what? Assuming that everybody that you work with in the schools wants to go in the same way that you do and prioritize excellence and skill over inclusion and feels, what amount of work do you see, or what opportunity do you see at this point politically in this year, in this month, where you will be particularly suited to do the work, whatever work that might be? Not the work like a woke thing, but like just the work, the potential work.
I understand. Well, part of my joy is listening, right? So if someone, and in Vermont, this is extremely prevalent. A lot of people are extremely scared about what's coming next under the Trump administration. So the first thing I need to do is to listen. And there's something we learned from the past is it's never a good idea to call the opposite side stupid, less informed, brainwashed, or...
They've been doing it for 20 years. So it doesn't seem to...
No, sure. But, it's you're still not providing evidence for what are you trying to say. It's like for me to say, well, the prefrontal cortex is here, and if you don't agree with me, you're stupid. Okay, but how do you know that prefrontal cortex is here? One of the answers that's a non-answer will be, well, because it's called the prefrontal cortex, so therefore it must be in the front, right? But that will be a circular argument. A lot of what's happening nowadays is circular in a philosophical sense. Like I don't really understand this aspect or that aspect of the policy, but if it comes from this part of the political spectrum, I have to be against it. So first of all, I'm not a politician, and also I'm fully transparent. I did not vote for either Harris or Trump. Some people might view this as a cop-out mechanism that will make the other candidate more likely to win. And statistically speaking, that might be the case. But for my field, if my choice was between, I don't know, Freudian psychoanalysis or phrenology, I know they're both wrong, and so I will not pick them. Just because, you think of two options, you don't have to pick them, and that's my idea in general. Now, which again, maybe just maybe makes me a good, person to talk to, because I don't have any real political agenda in that sense. Yeah. I'm not married to really any party. I don't belong to any party, and I did vote. I did not follow the anarchoid perspective. You know what? They're all corrupt. I'm not gonna vote. I did vote. I just did not vote for Harris or for Trump. Also, I like to offer this idea that sometimes I might agree with people, but not for the reason that they think I agree with them, and I will disagree with them for other reasons that I might think I disagree with them. I'm going to give you an example. Well, first of all, we in the US often have this idea that we are, at the center of the world, and so that if our education system falls apart, the world will collapse. Maybe it will fall apart, but it's not the first time that we kind of rose up from the ashes like a phoenix in the US. Just our very history. We used to have a fully British education system, and we moved away partially, at least, from that. So this might be, a change of scenario that we cannot expect, but I tend to be positive toward the future. I tend to be positive in a sense that I have to admit this, a teleological vision of reality, not a theological one, but teleological as I believe there is a structure, there is a direction, there is a meaning. Although I don't think that this meaning is linear. I don't actually think that we, I think you and I had the conversation in the past. Like, in general, traditional conservative approach is the one that thinks that the past is good and the future might be a little uncertain, and the progressive, that's the other way around. Everything that's new and novel, it's better, but tradition, and ancient stuff is bad. I think that something is good if it's good, regardless where or how it comes to be. So, I don't think that the truth can be, kind of just shunned away. Truth will just resurface eventually. Whatever shape or form, I'm not sure. Hitler tried to burn books. We no longer have Hitler. I tend to have a positive view in the future. Now, in practice, though, one of the things that I might be critical about the Trump administration approach to change this is maybe just the rate and the speed. It's almost it is a risk. Like, for instance, in Vermont, one of the areas where I'm very concerned is the way the merging of educational aspect with funding aspect are starting to have very negative consequences. For instance, to our part of our grants, our immigrant population, and how some of the money that was used to provide, let's use the term discounted education for disenfranchised people, are no longer there. And this is always a question of what type of statistical filter you have. Let's say in a pool of 100 candidates, maybe 85% of those candidates are the so-called diversity hires with not great skills or value, and then you just remove the whole program, then you might actually get rid of, that 5, 10, 15 candidates really deserve to be there. So it's always a question of how closer you want to get to the problem. And if we are too fast in removing policies, that might be not a good thing. So that's my criticism toward the Trump administration. However, the other risk is that, well, if we don't change anything, then the same people that used to have those bad policies in the past will still be present with a different name. I had the chance to travel and study and do a lot of research in Eastern Europe, and I was there for many, many years. Also, right at the end of the fall of the communist regime and government throughout Eastern Europe. And something that was told, to me, whether I was in Bulgaria, in former Yugoslavia, in the Czech Republic, was that, well, the regime fell, but the same people are governing us. They no longer part of this party. Now they're, whatever, liberals, but they're the same people. So that there will be the other problem that you get rid of, a policy, but the person just changes. And this is something that, if I permit to be slightly biased, subjective, selfishly so, and passionate about, is that people that were fighting against this, let's call it indoctrination, started doing that 5-10 years ago and were consistent. And their argument was always perking on science, love, and kindness. A lot of people now, after Trump got elected, claim, I was always on the side of truth and science. Yeah, but until yesterday, you promote those very policies that are against that. So it is true that a lot of people, if I want to give it a positive twist, I would say that a lot of people feel more empowered by the current state of affairs to speak up against those policies. But the downside of that, it's easier to portray yourself as the morally good or the winner if you want to jump on the podium with winner.
Well, in one sense, that somebody's winning if all the people who don't act according to deeply held convictions, but rather just respond to their environment in order to get along, which is a large part of people, especially in bureaucracies. Sure. They switch allegiances. So,
yes, you need to lose something. You and I had the chance to talk about that before. I'm not the only one that used to work. I'm not going to mention any names, but I used to work for another institution here in this state, and for lack of a better term, there was a purge of a lot of let's call it non-aligned professor in recent years. So yes, what I'm saying, I'm lucky and privileged and safe enough that I don't have anything to lose. Well, no, actually, I did lose quite a bit, but nothing of all the things I lost was comparably worth enough to lose honesty and truth. And that's why I say, it's those are things that I'm willing to compromise. Like a curriculum is a curriculum, but my children matter much more in my curriculum. And at the end of the day, it wasn't, even if it was, a Machiavellian, cynical person, truth has its power anyway, as in a lot of those fears are irrational ones. And I want to say this mostly to my colleagues on the board, but also other teachers. You might be afraid of something bad happening to you, but don't you worry. Embrace truth, be willing to be challenged. And I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm just here to have a conversation with you. This is something that I think as a society we should learn.
Yeah.
It's because sometimes people make that mistake. And I have noticed this both on the extreme left and extreme right. They have this idea that is emotionally charged. You call me names for the last 4 years of my administration. Now it's your turn. Okay. Yes, but that's not, one would say that's not a Christian thing to do. Like we all make mistakes, and I rather act rather than react, so it's your turn now. I'm gonna show you, what I'm capable of. Well, yeah, but it doesn't really solve the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So when is this election? And are you going to do some barbecues? How are you going to pay off the voters?
Well, I had to honor our heritage. So a mix of, Tyrolean, Austro-Hungarian, Slavic, and Italian food, maybe. Should do a very inclusive barbecue. It's a very small campaign. In fact, I decided not to have multiple ads or anything like that, but word of mouth. The election is on March 4th, although you could put in your ballot on March 3rd. So it's really right around the corner. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but
it's true.
In a perfect case scenario, it will be before March 4th. And in terms of what to do after either the win or the loss, it is what I said to my opponent. My main interest is to bring forth these ideas, whether you will be elected and you will use these ideas, or I'll be elected and I will use these ideas. What I care about is the ideas. And I really mean that. I really mean that, because ideas to some extent are also part of the truth. We don't really own them. They're not copyrighted.
Yeah.
It's human knowledge at that point. In
Creative
fact,
Commons. Yeah.
yes. There's this element of I don't know. I'd say joy in feeling that we're working on something together, and joy also kind of removes fear in a sense. Like when I say I don't care who's get elected, it's not I don't care about the process, but I care about the fact that destiny brought us together to untangle these problems.
It's a good idea to start with the ideas and then repeat the ideas and then repeat the ideas one more time. So what are these ideas that you're bringing to the table?
Well, I would say three main elements. I would say the first one is making the school simultaneously inclusive but also exclusive, academically speaking. As in, we want to make sure that our children and their family are appreciated for their intrinsic value, and therefore not because of the color of their skins, their gender, or sex. That's true inclusion. So everybody has the same opportunity, and we should not separate people on anything but merit. First element. Second thing, money well spent is not fair that families have to pay an enormous amount of money, a lot of which is really not justified. We're talking about $65 million for budget. Granted, the budget includes also renovating the school itself, but it's just not justified in my view. And so those money should be paid, if one is willing to pay, only if there is an equivalent in quality of education.
Yeah.
And the second point is that this quality of education was achieved for many, many decades without having to spend a lot of money. We don't really have to spend it. In fact, if you ask me, this is part of the fact that I did a lot of research on artificial intelligence and virtual reality. We really need pen and paper at the level of elementary and middle school. We don't really need more than that. If we had to have some technology, that should be implemented for specific either physical or mental challenges, and we can approach that from a perspective. So the first thing, the curriculum. So more focus on quality, facts, science, and merit. Second thing, money and how those money are spent with transparency, so that the family should be part of the school board and have a chance to discuss, to propose different things. And the third point is what I just said, bringing people together so that people are no longer afraid on the premise of whomever you voted for, what you stood for. Let's talk about topics so that we don't have an ad hominem attack, but only on the things that we are discussing.
Excellent. David, it's great to have you back on. This was kind of a narrow conversation because of the circumstances which you're in. We've had much broader conversations about linguistics and philosophy and history and geopolitics and neuroplasticity and neurology before. So I hope we can get back to those topics. But for this point, or this conversation, I think that's a really good package. So I thank you very much for showing up and sharing your point of view.
Thank you, Benjamin. Great job as usual. I appreciate it.
Excellent. I'm going to end the recording now.